Chapter 17, Video 4. The last video. I know you're so glad. I'm glad as well. Let's wrap up the Civil War. We're going to start with the Battle of Vicksburg. And Vicksburg is in Mississippi. The Union forces were led by Ulysses S. Grant, who is going to leave his supply base and live off of the land as he moves inward from Mississippi. He is going to pin down about 30,000 Confederate troops in the town of Vicksburg, Mississippi, and essentially starve them. The city will surrender, and the Southern Army in the city of Vicksburg will surrender Vicksburg on July 4th, 1863. This is a key battle in the western part of the Anaconda Plan, and we see this big loss for the South on July 4th, 1863. In the northern part of the Anaconda Plan, we see this Battle of Gettysburg. Now, Lee had just won the big Battle of Chancellorsville, where he had been outnumbered 2-1, but he had been victorious, and perhaps again it gave him some confidence, and he moved north for the second time. Confederate foragers were looking for shoes. Gives you an idea of how things are going for the Confederate forces. They're looking for shoes when they are going to see part of the Union forces. And so this battle will end up happening at Gettysburg. The North was led by George Meade, yet another selection by Lincoln as he's trying to find a decent general to lead the Northern forces. Meade outnumbered Robert E. Lee 2-1, of course, again. And Lee is going to fight hard, but he's going to put a lot into Pickett's charge against the Union center, and he's going to send a strong part of his forces across an open field where they will be picked off by the North. Lee will call for their retreat, and as these men retreated past him, he apparently was there beside the pathway with tears running down his face and apologizing to these men. The South had left about a third of those men on the field. The fall at Gettysburg, the Southern loss at Gettysburg, also happened July 4th, 1863. So July 4th, 1863 marks the turning point in the war. The South had done okay up to this point, but they're going to really struggle after this point. So it's both the win at Gettysburg and the northern win at Gettysburg, and the northern win at Vicksburg, which will turn the tide of the war. Lincoln then will travel to Gettysburg to dedicate the cemetery that will be there, and that's where he will give the Gettysburg Address. If you have time, just glance over it. It doesn't take long. It's a short speech, but it is very famous and very poignant. All right, so then we see this Battle of Chattanooga. The North was led by William Rosecrans, the South by Braxton Bragg. The South will lose at Chattanooga, and then we will see the South win at Chickamauga. So we're seeing more and more movement in to the southeast. So back to Grant and Lee. Lincoln had tried to find a general he would be happy with for the Army of the Potomac. And each general, even if the general had won, the general would not pursue Lee and ultimately defeat him, and it drove Lincoln crazy. So he had been keeping an eye on Grant in the West and seeing Grant win victory after victory in the West, and finally he said, "Bring Grant over here." He was warned by others not to do it, that Grant's a drunk, and apparently Lincoln said something to the effect of, "Well, find out what he's drinking and I'll get everybody a bottle." So he brings Grant over. Now, Grant was fighting a war of attrition, and he knew that. He knew it was going to be wearing the enemy down. And it was going to be the person, the side with the last soldier, with the last bullet, with the last piece of bread that will win. He also knew that he had a number advantage, and he knew that he could put men out on the front lines at a far greater rate than the South could do. And he had said that victory would go to the side which never counted its dead. And Grant apparently didn't count his dead, and he had really high losses. So the first matchup between Grant and Lee will be at the Battle of Wilderness. Grant had about 115,000 troops. Lee had about 65,000 troops. Again, Lee's outnumbered 2-1. Terrible fighting in the woods during this battle, and the woods caught on fire. And so even some of the wounded who might have survived the battle succumbed to the fire. And apparently it was just absolutely additionally horrific to the usual horrors of a battle. Lee is going to remove himself from the battle, right? He is going to pull his troops back and leave, and Grant is going to do something that no other Northern general had done before, and Grant will follow Lee and continue to chomp at Lee's heels. They will next meet up at the Battle of Cold Harbor, where Grant will take pretty heavy losses, but keep pursuing Lee. Now in the South, we see General William Sherman pursuing Joseph Johnston's army, the men that had fought under Joseph Johnston in northern Georgia. They're headed toward Atlanta. He's headed toward Atlanta because it was a railroad center in the South. Sherman had a very clear understanding that this was total war, which meant war against the civilian population as well. You had to beat the Northern morale and beat the will to fight. And so that meant if the Northern forces went to a farm and found a woman, you know, with children trying to hide her last chicken so the Northern army wouldn't get it, well, you take that last chicken. And they will really decimate Northern morale. And it will be very effective because you do start to see Southern women writing letters to the soldiers saying, "We're starving, please come home." So Sherman is doing total war tactics throughout the South, burning pretty much everything that he comes across. He will attack Hood outside of Atlanta, and Atlanta will be evacuated. And then Sherman is going to march down from Atlanta, dividing his forces into two groups and cutting a swath across Georgia, headed towards Savannah in what's called Sherman's March to the Sea. They are burning and pillaging as they go. Very few houses remain from that time period. If it were a hospital, if it were part of the Underground Railroad, if it were owned by a mason, Sherman was a mason, then the house might have been spared. But other than that, they burned and pillaged everything to destroy the Southern will to fight. They went into Savannah, and Savannah fell quickly. And Sherman is going to send word to Lincoln offering Savannah as a Christmas present to Lincoln. And from there, he will move on to South Carolina. Southern military leaders had notified Jefferson Davis that the war was ending and that he needed to get some good terms, but he refused to do so. Lincoln is going to take his second oath of office, and he realizes it's just going to be a short period of time before the South is going to give up. And he is going to talk about reconciliation with the famous line, "With malice toward none, with charity for all." He is already urging, let's not be angry and have hatred toward the South. Let's be charitable toward them and allow them to come back into the country when they're ready. The war will end up ending in a place called Appomattox. Jefferson Davis is going to gather up his valuables and hit the road, go on the run, escape Richmond, and head south. He'll be captured in Fitzgerald, Georgia, with his wife. Lee is going to realize that there's nothing left, really, that he is going to need to surrender. And so he is going to send word to Grant asking about the terms of surrender. Now, opponents of Grant's before would send word to Grant asking about the terms of surrender, and Grant would always respond that he wanted unconditional surrender. And that became his nickname, Ulysses S. Grant, U.S. Grant, Unconditional Surrender Grant. But with Lee, he is going to give some terms of surrender. Grant's going to understand that this is going to pretty much end the war. He is going to understand and have respect for Lee. And so he will give these terms of surrender. And the two men will meet in a home in Appomattox. The terms of surrender are that the officers will get to keep their sidearms and the soldiers will get to keep their horses and mules, which they'll need when they get back home. It was a ceremony to mark the end of this, of the surrender of these troops. And the book describes it: not a sound, no trumpets or drums, no cheers or jeers, an awed stillness as if it were the passing of the dead. So to sum up, 1 out of 12 men served in the Civil War. Huge numbers died. We will get more medical knowledge out of this. We will see something like 50,000 survivors missing an arm or a leg. And it will end tragically. Lee is going to give a very dignified statement of surrender, that after 4 years of arduous service marked by unsurpassed courage and fortitude, the Army of Northern Virginia has been compelled to yield to overwhelming numbers and resources, which implies if the South had had the numbers and resources of the North, the South would have won. Who knows? I have enjoyed putting this together for you all. For the most part, it's very awkward to be on film, but I hope that it has helped you to learn this material and that you will be prepared for the final exam. Thanks.